wacky space piano. Not exactly the result I wanted, but it's kind of fun. But that's the idea. That's the kind of stuff you can get into. I'll show you another example on here. This is one of the synthesizers in Logic. I know it looks very scary. But basically, like a big mixer, if you've been intimidated by 48 channels of a mixer, like, wow, lots of knobs. Basically, it repeats itself again and again and again. You just got to learn one strip. Same thing down here. These are all the same. Hopefully you notice that. I can say, hey, what do I want to control? I want to control this thing called cutoff. Okay, cutoff is part of my synthesizer here. What do you want to control it with? Well, instead of the wheel, I want to control that with aftertouch. And now it does. So the synth sound, which this was a basic sound here. Now it's controlled by aftertouch. If I turn that feature off, go back to something else, nothing, right? Again, so it's pretty easy to go in and just, this is where a lot of, when I was teaching students that are engineers, this is where their eyes lit up and they go, it's about control. I'm like, yeah. That's what I was trying to get into in the first place. It's like, I'm not trying to make you a keyboardist, I'm trying to teach you the idea that you can remotely control whatever you want. And if you understand what the messages are, you start understanding the language. So we learned aftertouch. Questions so far? We learned note on, we learned note off, we learned note numbers, we know the basic numbers, we know velocity. All right, so we learned aftertouch. Just a guess, how many levels of aftertouch were there? You remember seeing it? 128. They seem to repeat themselves. Yeah, it's just a common formatting of messages, and so there's 128 levels. Here's a really common one you were asking about earlier. It's called program change, and it allows me to select presets on a device. Like I'm choosing a sound on here called sign on, or I'm choosing a piano on here, or whatever. They're pre-programmed sounds, and I can select them from the sound computer to basically remotely control, say, hey, I want this, I want that. If I'm doing the lighting show, hey, the song number 3 came up, change the scene. And that could be a program change. Somebody could control it with their feet. A guitarist like Edge from U2 could have this massive, crazy guitar effects, gosh, like this wall of it, right? And from a foot pedal, choose the Streets from No Name crazy delay thing, right? Just simply, number 12, that's whatever, and so forth. There's a great video recently, this software that comes with the Logic Studio package is called Mainstage. It's like a live mixing sort of platform inside your computer. And basically they showed 9 Inch Nails and they were touring with this, and every song was a program change number. They said, hey, go to program 12, go to program 13. It's a really powerful tool. And so program changes allow us to choose presets from remote devices, tell them what to do. Pitch bend's another common message, move left and right on this. Or, very often you see it as a wheel, another simple message, changing pitch on stuff. And then this is one of the most fun parts of MIDI is this whole area called continuous controllers. And these messages allow me to control things like volume or panning or sustain or modulation, whatever. It's just a whole extra set of messages. How many messages do you think there are? There are 128 of them. And they spit out values of 128 each. Again, kind of going back to what we talked about really technically, that there is a status byte and 2 data bytes. So each data byte has 7-bit resolution. So anyway, that's, again, way over your head if you're not super technical, but what's nice is the formatting does stay the same. And so just give you a real quick overview on controllers, and I don't want to go too deep onto it, but a really common controller is this one called modulation, and you can see the message here. Let me just repeat the messages we learned, right? We learned note on, right? We learned we learned note on, we learned note off, right? We learned aftertouch, right? All right, note number and velocity. Now if I move this left and right, that's pitch bend. Their symbol for it has a center level to it, right? Because it's spring-loaded and always returns back to a center level. So continuous controllers have this symbol in Logic. It basically is like a little fader. So what's the message here? The message is, hey, this is continuous controller number 1, and the values amazingly go from 0 to 127. Now what does modulation sound like? Exactly, whatever you want it to be. Exactly, that's my trick question again, right? So in this case, I don't know. It's doing that thing that aftertouch was doing before. Whatever you want a program to do, you could turn it off so it doesn't do anything. So I've seen people control effects with it, make a rotary speaker on an organ spin up or slow down, and lots of fun stuff like that. That's kind of some neat stuff you can do with it. Another couple common messages that you might want. Maybe you want to control volume, and so this is a very common controller, controller 7, which controls volume. And so now, no volume. And what you'll see in Logic is I'm remotely controlling this fader with this continuous controller. It's number 7. And you don't have to learn them all, but definitely the information's out there. If you want to learn more about it, let me know. But a very common one would also be maybe panning, right? So that's what? Well, if I turn this knob, oh, hey, that's number 10. Okay, great. So 7, 10. Another common thing we might want to do is hold a note, sustain, right? So the message is basically, hey, sustain, or don't sustain. 2 values used in this case, just on and off, 0 and 127. So there's a variety of ways these to work, and there's again a whole ton of them. There's 128 different messages, whatever you want to change and control. So a neat kind of area for MIDI. So we learned some controllers. I had another page just of controllers. These are the ones I talked about. CC1 was modulation, CC7 was volume, 10 was panning. By the way, there's values, and so with panning they had to have a center value, which is a little weird because normally everything's 0 to 127. They had to figure out, well, what's center? And they just rounded it to 64, which is a little weird. But and then 64 is the other one I showed you just briefly, which is sustain on and off. So going back to my chart. I hope this works this time. There we go. Okay. Can you read some of it? Okay. So we didn't really talk about channels that much. I'm going to run out of time on channels probably, but there's 16 of them. And they basically allow you to remotely control different devices and so forth. So maybe we'll get into that, but there's 16 of them. Modes is something that's not used that much. Today, there used to be this very famous one called omni mode. And basically, one device connected to another was omnipotent, which means that it would any message you send me, I respond to, or send it out on everything. It's like the God mode, omni mode. And then there's like other modes that were basically channelized, individual modes. Note numbers, hey, we know what those are, right? This controller, transmitted column, right? It sends note numbers what? 0 to 127. Now it only has 61 keys. How is that possible? Well, you can do what's called transposition. I got this teeny little set of keys here, and so what do I have to do? I got a button that says octave, and just rocks down lower. I can go down to a C-2 or whatever the heck it is, all the way up to like a C7, or I forget how high it is. But anyway, so I can hit those other note numbers if I need to. The sound computer, does it respond to them? Oh yeah, hey, you can send me a 0, I'll play it. 127, I'll play it. What may not make sense, and you can see a little area next to note number that says true voice, is some instruments, that may not be realistic for a bassoon to play a 127, or a piccolo flute to play a 0. They just might be a little silly. So some sound computers say, I will only play the instrument within the true range. That kind of makes sense. At least that was the potential. I hardly ever have seen it used anymore. Note on. Do I send that? Circle. Yeah, I send that. Do I send a velocity with it? Yeah, the circle means I send note off velocities and note on velocities. So that does transmit them. Do I recognize them? Now, a lot of controllers, if I had the chart for this Korg TR, which this is a different chart, it's from Elisa's keyboard, another brand, and the note off on the Korg TR actually does not send a velocity. It just sends a note off. In fact, the value is always 64. Again, it's a really rare thing, Right, what about aftertouch? Oh, actually, yeah, there is aftertouch. Does it send? There's 2 forms. There's one called key-based aftertouch. It's very expensive. What would it require? A pressure sensor over every single key. It's really rare. You don't see it that often anymore. My ESR10 did it, but that was like a $3,000 keyboard. Most of them today do what's called channel aftertouch, which means there's an overall value for aftertouch across the whole keyboard. Going back to my Shogun sound here, if I play a low note and I play a high note, if I press in on the low note, it adjusts the high note. Notice it? All right. There's only one level of aftertouch across the whole keyboard. It's channelized. It would be expensive to do it key by key by key. Does that make sense? And so that's just what it says there.